What is up, guys? Danny Carlson here from Kenji ROI and the Actualized Freedom podcast, and this is going to be a really interesting video that goes deep into the psychology of why images on Amazon are the most important thing. And I'm sure you have heard that images and product photography are the most important part of an Amazon listing when it comes to raising their conversion rate and actually getting the sales, right? And I'm sure that makes sense to you because your product looks better than the competition, then the customer's more likely to purchase it over the competition. But I'm going to go more into the actual science behind it. It turns out there is a lot of studies. There's just decades of research and science that is supporting this. And you're probably familiar with the concept already of being a visual learner. So I'm definitely a visual learner. I have a much easier time comprehending things and learning things visually, actually seeing it, actually watching videos, actually looking at graphs and diagrams than I do from reading things. And my reading speed is actually pretty slow, and my comprehension is very slow, and it takes my brain a lot more processing power to learn that way. And the science supports me on this. So a really interesting stat here, visuals are processed 60,000 times faster in the brain than text. That's absurd, 60,000 times faster in the brain. So I'm going to go into some examples of that. You probably don't believe me at this point, but by the end of this video, you're going to believe me. So we can get the sense of a visual scene in less than 1/10 of a second. You can just glance at something and instantly, boom, you have a sense of what's going on there. Your brain recognizes things. It's making connections to things it already recognizes in its brain, and it gets a sense of it. So when it comes to shopping on Amazon, if you're not over-optimizing your images to get across the main benefits of your product, to show it in the best light possible, then you are relying on things that are not 60,000 times faster and things that take people a long time to actually read through and takes their brain a lot more processing power to get through. So another really interesting stat about this. If you look at something for 2 seconds, you can get a ridiculous amount of detail that is equivalent to reading at 30,000 words per minute. So my reading speed is about 400 words per minute, and that's like a decently fast reading speed. But 30,000 words per minute is way in excess of that. So I think now you have a good idea of why the images are super important. Let's go over to an actual example, and let's see how much information we can recall. So I'm going to have this on the screen for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Okay, so what can we recall from that? Well, okay, so it was over top of a flaming barbecue, so that glove definitely is showing some resistance to heat. It is protecting the hand from the heat. Also, he is holding on to something that's metal that's got some hot coals in it, so it's got to be pretty well insulated. Also, I can see the little grippy parts on there, so it's probably got some good grip on there, which is going to make it easier for me to handle my barbecue items. It is on a beautiful summer day there. That is, I have a coal barbecue, so this is going to work for my coal barbecue. That is just a fraction of the information that I have there. Another thing, it is going partway up the wrist. I can see that it form fits to my wrist and roughly how large it is compared to this guy's hand here. So I have an idea of roughly the size of it. I can see the branding on there. This is the Grill Hat brand. That's just recall from seeing something for literally 2 seconds. For me to write all of that out that I said would take me a very long time, and then assuming that someone is actually going to read that big paragraph that I just wrote is even more absurd, right? So that's just the power of imagery right there. And I'm going to go into an actual example of 2 different Amazon listings and how to optimize this in a second, but let's go into some more science here. This stuff is super fascinating to me, and I actually spent quite a lot of time looking over the research. So just think about it this way. It makes a lot of sense. Our brains evolved to be very highly efficient visual processing machines. Since literally the very first human being, our brains have been able to look at something with our eyes, and then our brain will turn it into information just incredibly efficiently. That's just in our DNA as humans. And, before humans, even like millions of years before, all of our predecessors, our ancestors, they had the same abilities, right? So it is something that is just inherently in our DNA that our brains are very well adapted to. Whereas language, and especially even written language, is even newer. Written language is only like a few thousand years old, and language in general is like still not that old when it comes to the overall length of human evolution. So our brains are not really made for that yet. Like they are adapted to it and we learn it as little kids. But just think about that as a little kid. It took you years and years of constant practice and developing to even be able to read and understand language and communicate with each other effectively using language, right? But from the day we were born, we were able to look at images and get an idea of what's going on and recognize patterns and all this kind of stuff. So super, super important to understand that. And the world's best memory athletes use visual techniques to remember everything. If they're remembering very long numbers, then they will see a chunk of those numbers and they'll create a visual in their brain that represents those numbers. If they are remembering a string of 5 words, they're going to remember one visual image of something that represents those 5 words together. So they're just taking something that is text or non-visual and turning it into visual because the brain is more effective at remembering visuals. And this is something that's super applicable to Amazon listings. It's the short-term working memory versus the long-term memory. So our brain has something called a short-term working memory, which lasts for about 15 seconds. And this is best described when you're trying to remember a credit card number. So if you're like me, then you remember the first 4 numbers, and you go and you type it in, and then you go look at the second 4 numbers. Okay, type those in, third 4 numbers. But by the time you've typed in the last number, you probably don't remember what the first 4 numbers were. And then certainly 2 minutes later, if you tried to just come back and remember the entire number, very small chance that that's going to happen, right? Whereas if you were driving on the way to work and you saw an attractive member of the opposite sex, for example, I bet there's a very good chance you can remember what hair color he or she had, what they were wearing, how they were walking, how they carried themselves, what kind of accessories they had in their hair, were they wearing headphones or not. You can remember a ridiculous amount of information about that in such detail, right? So that's a very good example of how that can work. And visual cues also are much better at triggering emotions. If you see an image of a child in a war-torn country and they're in just really raggedy clothes and they're like holding their mother or something like that, instantly you can feel the emotion that triggers just instantaneously. Whereas to trigger that same kind of emotion with text would require an entire paragraph to write out that much detail, and there's a much smaller chance that it actually would trigger that emotion, and definitely not in the same way. So when it comes to Amazon listings, using the images in a way where it is showing the model actually in the act of receiving the main benefits of the product, where they are most likely to be receiving those positive emotions of your product or solving the negative emotions that your product solves, that is a really powerful way where the customer sees the image, they can feel the emotion, it is much more memorable for them and they're much more likely to buy. But it's really important to not forget that this can work against you as well. So in the same way that we can really quickly gain the information, we can also really quickly gain bad information. So this is most prevalent when using stock images or really pixelated images, just images that, bad lighting and stuff like that. People will very rapidly get the wrong impression of your brand and even can equate you to a scam, right? So in a worst case scenario, you're using some really poor stock images and you have a really pixelated version of your product, then people might not even trust that they're actually going to get their product. On Amazon, they've solved a lot of these trust issues, but even 5 or 10 years ago, buying stuff online for a lot of people was a no-go because they're too worried about getting scammed, right? Because scam artists are using really poor quality images. They don't have access to really nice product photographers and stuff. So make sure that your images are really top quality or else it can actually work against you. Okay, now let's look at a few examples of actual Amazon listings. And I'm only going to look at the images over here. I'm not going to look at ones with text on them because I think that's cheating. Let's just look at some examples of, what the actual image can tell you just from a quick glance. So I can see the main image. So I can see that it folds out like that. It folds out very small, but then this product folds out. Very interesting. Okay, so it is operated by a lock. So I see the person opening the lock, and then that's how it folds out, connects to itself. Looks like it'd be very handy, and I can see roughly the size of it too. Like it is a little bit smaller than the forearm of this woman. So roughly I have an idea of kind of the weight and the size of this just from looking at this image, and I can understand how the product operates with the key. And I can see in this image here how it folds out. Not a whole lot of extra information there. Okay, this one. So a lot of information is packed in this image. I can see, okay, so it is easily can secure around this small bar here. I roughly can see how big that bar is compared to the model's hand there. So I could see, like, from this image, I can tell easily, if I had a small tree or something like that in downtown, I could probably lock it to the small tree. Certainly the bike lock by my work, I could easily lock it to that. It looks like all of these joints here, they move around too, so it'd be pretty flexible, like easy to lock in, unlike some of those, those ones that are just solid pieces of steel that maybe I couldn't squeeze it in the right way and do it. That looks, it's handy. It can kind of butterfly itself out like that. Looks pretty easy to operate. And then, okay, so I can attach it to my bicycle very, very easily. It looks like it's got some mounting hardware on that and conveniently can attach it to my bicycle. So all that information, I spent a long time explaining that, but it took a fraction of a second for my brain to instantly recognize and see all that information. I could just as easily have gotten that information in like a tenth of the time that I explained it to you guys, right? And then let's look. So by the way, this is a listing that Kenji ROI did for one of our clients, Sigtuna. So, this is the way that we like to create our images. And, graphic design images with text are good, but that's not what I'm trying to show here. I'm trying to show the power of imagery alone. And let's look at this. This looks like the exact same product from a competing brand. Let's look just my impression from the images here. What can I see only from the images? Okay, I can see here that it's, I can't really tell what the product is. I can see on the back, this looks like it's got a loop to attach it to something and some random little pad thing on the left. I don't really know what that is. It looks like I can attach it using these hooks here, but it's kind of unclear what the product is by the first two ones. Okay, I can see that it's got a key on it. Now I probably know that it is, it's a lock of some kind. Okay, so, but I still don't really know how it works. Okay, now I can see that it's unfolded, but to me it's unclear that that is the same thing. So yeah, now I can see, yeah, it's probably the same thing. That's how it looks when it is folded out. That kind of makes sense, but I don't really see how it operates because it's still closed. Like maybe you can open it and then close it like that. I don't know. Okay, that one's, cheating because it's got the text on it. Okay, so it comes with the accessories, got some straps. I guess that's the mounting hardware that I saw earlier up there. That's good, and it looks like this thing can, strap itself somewhere. Okay, so now I see it in action. So yeah, clearly it must open up somewhere, and I can lock it around there. This is a hilarious image, actually, because they didn't lock the bike properly. They just locked it around the top of the tube, so someone could slip the lock over the top of the seat. That's really funny. But, yeah, so you can see, I kind of had a hard time really figuring out what the product was. Now, I'm cheating here. Obviously, I know what this product is already, but I'm just thinking through my thought process in the brain. It was much more difficult. I had to kind of do some sleuthing to figure out what it was, whereas in this one, it's very clear. I can instantly get a lot of information just based on the fact that this model is using the product in the way that it's meant to be used, and it's an actual model using it. You can see roughly the size just based on, how the model's handling with it. You can see so many different things just in those pictures. So that's a little insight into the science of why imagery on Amazon is so important. If you're armed with this information and you really understand it, then you're in a much better position to come up with an amazing product photography shot list, hand off to your product photographer, or if you're a great photographer, do it yourself. Or if you're looking for someone to completely take it off your hands, Kenji ROI does really great product photos. I mean, you be the judge of that just based on what you see here on this listing here. But understanding that is getting inside the mind of your customers. And in my opinion, that's one of the most important skills that you can have as an e-commerce seller. And, that's basically sales copywriting, but applying the psychology of sales copywriting to images. So hopefully this was valuable or at least interesting to you guys. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to drop me a comment, and see you guys next time.